Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial. Hit the bell icon button so that you don't miss out any tutorial.
In this lesson, we are going to start to talk about component styling, and we're going to introduce the ngClass core directive. Many of the styles that we are using here are coming here from this global styles.css file. We can also add styles locally at the level of the component, as we will see. Right now, let's talk about a particular type of styles, which are conditional styles. These are styles that are added to sections of the page depending on the content of the data. So unlike the styles that we have here, such as for example the course card class, there could be a class that is added here to our course card depending on if, for example, the course is of category beginner or not. Let's now go ahead and add such a conditional class to our component. We're going to add it directly here at the level of the component CSS file itself, which is currently empty. We are going to first start by writing our CSS selector, and what we are going to target is this container div here that is wrapping the whole course card component. Let's then create a style that targets any element that has applied this course card class, and let's add here an extra CSS class beginner. So this CSS class is also known as a state class. This state class is going to be applied only to courses of type beginner. Let's make this beginner class very visible in our screen. We are going to add here a bright color, such as for example this one. And let's try this out to see if this style is working correctly. So if we head over here to our course card component, let's quickly add here the beginner CSS class and see that indeed we can very quickly spot a card with this style, but the style, as we can see here, is being applied to all the cards. We want to apply it only to certain courses. Let's then start by removing here the CSS class and see how can we apply styles using ngClass instead. ngClass is a core directive that comes bundled with Angular. So with the ngClass directive, we're going to be able to pass an argument that is going to turn on or off certain CSS classes. The expression that we pass in here to ngClass can take several forms. We can pass to ngClass a string, we can pass also an array, and we can also pass it a configuration object. Let's explore the three possibilities. Let's see, for example, how can we pass a class that we want to activate using a string. We can do so by passing in a string here and passing the beginner CSS class. So as you can see, this string that gets received gets interpreted as CSS, and the CSS class is added to the page. Now notice one thing, this string does not have to contain only one CSS class. We could potentially add here several CSS classes separated by a space. So if we try this out, you can see that the style has remained unchanged and our cards look the same as before. It's not recommended to apply this type of styles that are constant using ngClass. These type of styles are better applied using the CSS class property as usual. ngClass is really meant only for conditional styles. Another thing that we can pass to ngClass instead of a string is an array. So we can pass in here an array of strings containing a list of all the CSS classes that we want to apply to a given element. So again, if we pass in here these two CSS classes, we are going to see that they are being correctly applied here to our template as expected. Another thing that we can pass to ngClass is a configuration object. So instead of passing a string or an array of strings, we can instead pass in here an object whose properties are the names of the CSS classes that we want to apply and whose values are true or false depending on if we want to apply the style or not. So as we can see, our styles are still working as expected, but if we now set here the beginner class to false, we are going to see that the beginner class is no longer being applied to the template. Now notice the following about ngClass. We don't have to pass in here as the expression passed to ngClass directly an object that is hard-coded here at the level of the template. Instead, what we can do is we can call a function that returns us this configuration object. This is actually the recommended approach in order to keep the template readable. So we are going to call here a new method called CarrotClasses. And we are going to create this new method here at the level of our component. So this method is going to return to the template the same thing that we were returning before. Let's start here with a simple example. We are going to return here a configuration object, which was the last example that we gave. Notice that this method could also return a string or an array of strings like we have seen before. Those are also accepted by ngClass. So if we try this out, we are going to see that again, we still have here the correct styles applied. If we return here the value true, we are going to see that now the beginner class is being applied as expected. So this is a better way of adding some conditional styling to our class to call a method and add here our logic in TypeScript. We are going to now apply the logic of only activating this class for beginner courses, and we are going to do that in the following way. We are going to access here course, we are going to access the category property, and we are going to check if the category property is equal to beginner. If that is the case, then the CSS class is going to be applied because we have here true. Otherwise, this is not going to be applied because we get false. Let's see this in action. If we now hit refresh, we are going to see that our beginner class is only being applied to certain courses. And if we confirm the courses that are receiving the CSS class here in our DB data file, we are going to see that indeed the first beginner class on the list, it's this RxJS in practice course. So the style is being correctly applied as expected. Before giving a few more examples, let's take the time to remove this class here from our configuration object, because as mentioned, we should only define here styles that are conditionally applied. So this style is better applied here at the level of the class property. Now let's take a moment to see how this conditional styling logic could have been written in a simpler way. So returning a configuration object is only one possibility, like we saw before. So let's rewrite this so that we return instead a string. So what we're going to do is we are going to add here an if clause. We are going to test inside this if clause if this is a beginner course, and if that's the case, we are going to return here either an array containing the beginner string, or we can also return the string directly. Let's start first with the example of an array. We are going to try this example out and see if everything is working correctly. So as you can see, the style is indeed being correctly applied, and we don't get here any errors at the level of the console. So our logic is working correctly. Here, instead of returning an array because we only have one element, we can also return here a string directly. And again, the logic is being correctly applied. And with this, we have covered the ngClass core directive. Let's quickly summarize when is this directive meant to be used. We should use ngClass whenever we want to add or remove a style to our template, depending on the content of the data. Typically, we only use ngClass to add or remove a few styles per component. ngClass is not meant to replace the CSS class property. So if the styles are constant and they are always associated to an HTML element, we should add them in the CSS class property as usual. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the Angular ngStyle core directive. So as we have seen in the last lesson, we can use ngClass to add CSS classes to our component conditionally, depending on the value of the course data, for example. In the same way that we want to add CSS classes conditionally, we might also want to add CSS styles directly. Most of the time, we are going to be able to style our components by simply using plain CSS classes and nothing more. But there are occasions where we would like to apply a style directly to a component. Let's then quickly apply a style to one of these elements and see how styling works without using ngStyle first. Let's say that, for example, we would like to make this text here, the title of the card, underlined. We can do that using the input template syntax in the following way. We are going to access the style property of our element. So this is a DOM property. This is not Angular specific. And we are going to write into it a value under the text decoration property. So we are going to say that the text decoration style element of this course title div here is going to have the value underline. So if we refresh here our application, we are going to see that now all the cards have here an underlined title. Now imagine that instead of only one style, we would like to apply multiple styles to this div. So we would have to use multiple times this syntax, one for each style. A more convenient way of applying multiple styles to an element is to use instead the ngStyle directive. So we are going to be using again the input syntax, but this time we are using ngStyle. ngStyle is going to take here on the right hand side a configuration object whose properties are the styles that we want to modify. So in this case we want to modify the text decoration property, and whose values are the value of the property itself. So in this case we want to set text decoration to underline, and if we would like to add here multiple other styles, we can do so via this configuration object by providing here multiple properties. So as you can see, the underline is still being applied here to our card title. Now we can also pass here an expression to ngStyle, like it happened here in the case of ngClass. We can, in a similar way, call here a function that we are going to be creating here at the level of our component. This function can return a configuration object just like we did for ngClass. So we can return here our configuration object, and if we try this out, we are going to see that everything is still working just like before, but this makes it much simpler to turn on and off certain styles programmatically here at the level of the template, as we have access here to the course input object. Notice that we could also access the course object here, but if we start adding too much logic to our template, then the template becomes less readable. Instead of adding too much logic here, it's better to simply call a function at the level of our component and implement here our logic in TypeScript. And just like it happened before in the case of ngClass, we really want to avoid to have constant values here. We should only define here styles using ngStyle for properties that are dynamic and depend on the content of the data. Let's give here a quick example. Imagine that instead of displaying here the course image using the image tag, we would like to display the image as a CSS background of this card here. So in order to do that, we would need the following CSS property. We will need to set background-image. So this is a CSS property that can be applied to any div that is going to apply a given image as the background of a section of the page. In order for this to work, we need to call URL, and we need to pass in here a complete URL to the image that we want to use as background. So we can concatenate here the icon URL of our course, for example. And we could add here multiple other dynamic properties if needed. Before trying this out, let's switch back here to our example. We were accidentally applying here our styles here only to the title. We want to instead apply this new dynamic style to the complete card. So if we now try this out, we are going to see that our div is receiving as its background the course image as intended. As you can see, there are a lot of options for styling our components. Let's put back here our image and quickly discuss the multiple options that we have available for styling our components. So most of the times we want to style our components with plain CSS classes, such as the one that we have here. That is the most common way of styling our components. We should not use systematically ngClass or ngStyle. ngClass should be used a lot more frequently than ngStyle. ngClass is meant for conditionally adding or removing classes depending on the content of our data. So typically we want to use ngClass only for CSS state classes that indicate the presence of a given state in our component. On the other hand, sometimes there are certain CSS properties that we want to populate depending on the data. An example of that type of property is the background image property, as we have seen. So if we run into that case when we want to set a particular CSS property with data-dependent content, for that we can use ngStyle.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you like the video, do give us a thumbs up and share it. Also check out amazing discounts and offers on our premium courses in the description below.